Wildfire challenges us somewhere every day. Our departments and crews are responding to more fires with greater complexity, our communities are experiencing larger and more destructive fires, and associated losses continue to rise. In this podcast, we'll explore all of this with the people who are experiencing wildfires firsthand. We'll talk about leadership and technology on the front lines, hear stories about that which responders are experiencing on the ground. We'll talk to the people in our communities that are creating innovative solutions, and we'll expose heroes doing great things before, during, and after these fires. We welcome you to Wildfire Chronicles, Heroism Beyond the Flames. Morning, everyone. Tom Jenkins, man, it's good to have you here.
Likewise. Good to be here.
You and I have been friends for quite a while.
Yeah.
It's good to sit at this table with you now, watching how you've had the meteoric rise.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Probably 15 years, right?
Maybe longer. I'm not sure. You'd know better than I. I'm old. You're not. You're a youngster.
Long time. But yeah, it was easy to say yes when you made that. Even though it's 7 o'clock in the morning, it was easy to come and hang out.
It is early and you're fresh out the gym. So thanks for joining Kevin and I today. Man, tell us about your background. I know you're working on some pretty cool research and NERIS in particular, but tell us how you got here, man.
Yeah, that's a good question. I always kind of joke around and say I kind of Forrest Gump my way through the fire service and
I feel you.
And just ended up in all the right places with all the right ingredients of luck. But I started as a firefighter in Oklahoma. That's where we met. I was last before I left the state, working in a suburb of Tulsa as the deputy chief. Took a job as the fire chief for the city of Rogers, Arkansas, which is where the first Walmart was. So it was like it was Santa Fe-ish in terms of size anyway. Yeah. And so I always spent 15 years there as a chief, but I always told folks that in all the communities that I worked for, it was the only municipality that kind of put its money where its mouth is with public safety. You found a lot of cities that were quick to be like, oh, we prioritize public safety, and they'd build another bigger park or a splash pad. And meanwhile, the fire department was struggling for what we felt were bare essentials, and Rogers in particular, mainly because from an economic point of view, it was very affluent, it was very fast growing. But those 15 years there that was just a community it was where the porridge was just right in terms of being big enough to face some risk and complexity that you would see in the most urban of environments, and it was also small enough that you could be nimble and test drive some stuff. And if you screwed up, you could take a few steps back and do it better. And so I've spent 15 years there, and then an email and a phone call about 15 months ago that indicated they were looking for somebody with a fire service background to be part of this NERIS project. And it didn't take a lot of convincing and discussion to figure out that this was something that was, that you only get really one good shot at in a generation to do right for the fire service. And I couldn't think of anywhere better to be,
great opportunity.
Woven in now.
Yeah. And you're representing, man. You've got the Rogers.
It ended up perfect this morning by accident. Yeah.
Right? I mean, you don't have, was it Sand Springs? I
was in Sand Springs.
Right?
Yeah.
Sand Springs.
Good memory.
And you got FSRI. What's FSRI?
The Fire Safety Research Institute, part of UL Research Institutes. And of course, they're the contractor to the United States Fire Administration, the Department of Homeland Security, Science and Technology Directorate. And it's this trifecta of work to design NERIS. And of course, none of those three people or three entities that I just named they're not really the beneficiaries of it. It's the fire service. And so I always tell people it was tough to leave the fire department. I oftentimes look at it as I went from being on one roster to like 27,000 rosters now, right? Like we're all working for everybody, and it just sounds like lip service until you dive into it. And it's true.
That's a pretty cool thing for you, but what a score for all of us in the 27,000 to have you in there doing that work. No joke, man. It's
I appreciate that.
Yeah, as 15, 20-year friends, you probably think what I'm saying is BS. But
absolutely.
That's impressive, man. I'm proud of you, and I'm happy you're doing that on our behalf. So you said NERIS, man. I want to get back to your history for a second, but just because you said it, what does NERIS stand for? What is it?
That is the National Emergency Response Information System. Yep. It is the first place you have to go is you have to say it's the replacement for NFIRS, but then I have to quickly follow up with some corollaries that's really just one of several components of what it is. It's going to be the data ecosystem for the fire service that will, I don't know exactly how you felt when you were chief in Santa Fe, but I can venture to say as well as I know you that you felt a lot like I did, where I never felt that the data systems we had in place or the information available was ever equipped to help me do my job. Like if I was going to answer questions as a fire chief that I was going to have to get real creative. Even in Rogers, which is like 170 career firefighters, like we had to have a full-time analyst to dive into stuff. That's not sustainable for most. I mean, we would represent, less than 1% of entities that were able to fund stuff like that. Most departments have big problems, big questions, very few good answers, reliable answers. And that's what we're trying to shorten, is the gap for fire chiefs. And also to, you look at FSRI leading that charge, it's this lithium ion battery question is a fine example of we've got to get the research and squeeze it closer to problem identification. That, when did we start talking about lithium ion batteries? Was it 10 years ago? I don't think it was that long ago, but it was sometime maybe in the last half decade that started popping on the radar. And how many times in our careers have you really felt confused about how you suppress a fire? Do you drown it? Do you let it burn? Do you do something in between with some, widget that has yet to be made? And we're still kind of wrestling with that question. Like, what do we do when an electric vehicle, and its battery systems go into thermal runaway? And so to have NERIS as a key component of the portfolio of things that FSRI does, it means that in the future, when we have these problems, when we have these questions, we can get researchers right on it so that we don't have fire chiefs, firefighters, and company officers scratching their heads out there in the field.
Yeah. I want to go back to your history for a second, and then we're going to dig into this data geek stuff, because I think for standard boots on the ground person, you're like, man, it's just data, right? But you start to realize what data can inform when you get into it. So there's a ton to pick apart there. But first, you're humble like you always are, man. I don't just say this because we're friends, but when I look at my past and think about the leaders I'd want to work for, you're one of those. You're the person who, gets what people are doing. You're the firefighter's leader, and you're doing it once again, right? So let's talk about your history. Okay. You came up through the ranks here in Oklahoma. You went to be the chief in Rogers, and then there was this period where you were representing on a national level, IFC president. Tell us about that, man. What was that about, and why'd you do it?
Well, I had an opportunity with the IAFC to serve on they had some programs years ago. You may remember them, called FSTAR, Firefighter Safety Through Advanced Research, and it was kind of in some ways related to what I was just talking about. It was trying to figure out, how do you take this really good research that was coming for the first time ever in droves on the back of, the fire grant programs that were started in 2000, 2001. And how do you get it so that it's digestible to firefighters and fire chiefs that don't feel like reading a report that's an inch thick or more? And so I was involved with the IAFC, and Mark Light, who was the CEO at the time, was always kind to offer me some career recommendations and opportunities to serve on, committees or whatever. And I went to him one day in probably 2014, and I said, "Hey, I would really like to, just continue to stay involved. I think it's good for me. It matched the strategic plan of Rogers. One of our goals was to make sure we were nationally recognized and participating, not just locally and regionally, but on a national level, and stuff that was good for the industry." And so I told Mark, I said, "Hey, I'm interested. I'll continue being on committees or working groups or whatever if you'll have me." And he said, "If you really want to get involved, you need to run for one of these principal officer positions," which seemed pretty ominous. I was young, I became a fire chief in my late 20s. Yeah. And so I was probably I was in my like early 30s then. And you can be intimidated by people who have been in this business longer than you've been alive. But I decided to run on his recommendation. I ran against somebody who actually ended up becoming my friend, Niles Ford, with the city of Baltimore, and was able to win that election. And then you're in the right place, or surrounded by these people. The principal officers of the IAFC then were Keith Bryant, who went on to be a fire administrator, Rhoda Mae Kerr, who was our association's first female president, John Sinclair, who is kind of, I look at him as kind of the IAFC historian. He served as a longtime international director and chairman of the EMS section. And so I was around, those folks. Dan Eggleston followed behind me, and Gary Ludwig. And it was just, for a guy of my age and my tenure, that time in the IAFC was just a wonderful incubation period where I got exposed to a lot of really good people with very diverse talent sets. And I can't think of any, other opportunity in the time associated with the IAFC that was as beneficial to me as being around some of those folks.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that ends up being a 4-year commitment. Is that right? Because you got a couple before, then the president year and after, and then sort of a career-long commitment.
I'm definitely, yeah. I was going to say, I think on paper what they tell you is it's a 4-year commitment because you do the second vice, first vice, you spend a year as president, and then you're a past president. You're most effective your last year as past president, right? Like, it takes you your second vice and first vice year just to figure out who's who, the politics of the organization. I mean, I don't think a lot of firefighters realize that. This is an organization that's founded on the heels of the Great Fire of Chicago that was serving to originally standardize hose thread and fire hydrant thread so that we were interoperable. And even today, we still haven't even accomplished like our one thing that we wanted to do. But we've done a lot of other really cool stuff along the way. I'm not saying that we haven't been productive. And so it's an old organization. At one point in time, this could be a complete lie, but somebody told me it was either the or among the oldest nonprofits in the country.
Wow. And
so, you have a 4-year commitment. I actually stayed on a little bit afterward to help with the CEO search, and I serve as the chair of the past president's council now, which is all the has-beens that know all the politics. And when we have all the great ideas and we have no authority anymore. So definitely stay involved, but it's a great association to stay involved with. Like it's going to FRI, coming to TSI or any of the other conferences is like a homecoming for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and so coming from what you just said, you said you get to go to FRI, TSI. There's this whole host of other conferences. I remember seeing you at the WUI conference a couple times. You had to do international. I'd imagine you really start to get a good scope of what's led you to what you're doing now, which is what is sort of the state of the profession? What do we have to do to take the next step? How do we even document what we are doing? Right? Does that lead to why this has interest and why NERIS might and likely does have a real positive impact on our future?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess I don't know exactly why I was fortunate enough to be picked to, be kind of the designated fire person in a team of, very smart data scientists and developers and, software engineers. But what I do think my time with the IAFC equipped me with was just a good understanding of the spectrum and complexity of the whole ecosystem of fire, like 1.2 million firefighters in the country. And one of the primary benefits of serving in that IAFC chair is, I was in Guam and Saipan and Tinian, and you go to the city of New York and you go to the West Coast and the East Coast and the North and the South. And you really start to understand that, when you look at initiatives like Dr. Lori's put into place nationally, that one voice, one voice is really a target and a battle cry, in my opinion, to make sure that we rally these big fire service organizations with a lot of influence, that we were singing out of the same hymnal and often, or as much as possible, on the exact same, page number of that hymnal. And so when you look at why we do that there, well, in the fire service, we have that exact same need when you look at the complexity of 27,000 fire departments, that we have to find commonality with each other. We often celebrate all of our differences, and we all kind of think in our own special way that my community is a little better, special, different, more this, less that than others. And that when you really dive into it, it is, shockingly similar. Like, we are all cousins in this business, and we have to find a way to really synergize the commonality of those 27,000 fire departments. Seeing that as an IAFC officer, I think really helps me when we're tackling some of the data questions associated with NERIS, to figure out how do we make sure we benefit the largest municipal fire department in the country, city of New York, all the way down to some of these departments that don't have concrete on their apparatus bay floor.
That's a big task. All right, man. So NERIS.
Yes.
What is NERIS going to do that NFIRS is not? As a practitioner, going to feel a difference?
Well, I think that it'd be hard to answer that succinctly. I think that if I was talking chief to chief, I think the primary thing that it's going to do that NFIRS doesn't is it's designed for us. It's designed for fire service decision makers. That's a characteristic difference. NFIRS was not all bad. NFIRS was old. It got archaic. It was missing an opportunity to really help tell the full spectrum of the story, whether that's risk, whether that's performance, whether that's the way in which we respond, the manner in which we tackle problems. A lot of the story that just was left untold. What happens after the parking brake is pulled on the fire truck, on the fire ground? Well, there's a lot of information there that's just, we just don't talk about it. And so NERIS is replacing that system, and it's doing so in a way that's just more comprehensive and modernized, that it's designed to be nimble. It's designed to change. I was given a presentation here yesterday, and one of the things that I tried to highlight to the participants in the room was that, version 2 is going to be deployed just in the next 12 months. And we just got version 1 deployed within the last 30 days. And the last time that NFIRS was updated was my second year as a firefighter, decades ago.
Jeez.
And so that's evidence that this is not a bunch of talk. It's not a bunch of lip service. It's not a bunch of cheerleading. This is a system that's designed to really help. And it's not going to be perfect. It's not divinely inspired, but it is organized and worked on by a committed group of individuals. Like even that's kind of inspiring to me, and probably something worth sharing with you, is even the software folks. I mean, these people that are computer centric, they have figured out that this is a mission that is not about making somebody millions of dollars. This is about keeping communities safe. And all you have to have is a little bit of exposure to tragedy, whether that's on the, evening news, whether that's personally in your life, to have experienced an emergency that interrelated to, use of the 911 system. And all of them seem to just be really excited about contributing to something that is going to help, local communities become more safe, one call at a time. That's pretty cool.
That is very cool.
Yeah.
As we're sitting here in these things, Kevin will sit back as we start to really get into stuff, because he can tell when we're in a groove. I can tell when Kevin's got something because he's writing notes feverishly.
Only 2 pages so far.
That's his sign. Do you want to jump in, Kevin?
I got something for you. I mean, you mentioned the word data ecosystem, and ultimately data equipped to do my job better. I think a lot of times when there's still kind of a little bit of I couldn't do that, or that seems a bit too confusing, or how would I do that? I need a data analyst. That just seems incomprehensible for me to even think about that. Could you paint a little picture on sort of what you mean by data ecosystem, and ultimately how is NERIS equipping every fire department with the ability to create, harness, and use data to make better decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. The example I use is that, our current system, the legacy system NFIRS, was really just a repository of some, data sets that, because of the very clunky manner in which it was shared and rolled up, you just didn't have much hope to extract anything that was of value. And it lacked some ability to really reflect the risk in our communities. And so as a fire chief, one of the problems, like a real world problem that I encountered was, we ran 9 fire companies in the city. That's close to Santa Fe size, right? Yeah. We ran 9 fire companies in the city. Not all of those fire companies were equipped with hydraulic extrication tools. I had a company officer come to me who was, motivated, and he said, I think the company I'm assigned to should be equipped with hydraulic extrication tools. And as a fire chief, when you have a company officer saying, I would like to do more work, I would like to be better equipped to do my job. Like I think you have an obligation to respond regardless, but it's always a little inspiring to be like, well, let's dive in here. But hydraulic extrication tools aren't cheap. They're probably 50, 60 grand, I would guess. And so I have an obligation to taxpayers to figure out if I'm going to make an investment in another set of hydraulic extrication tools for another company in the city, is the, juice worth the squeeze? And so I spent some time trying to understand how many times and where we were extricating people from, balled up pieces of metal that used to look like automobiles. And you can't get that information. Like, it was impossible for me reliably to figure out where in my city that was just 50 square miles and about 100,000 people, I couldn't answer the question of where do we do that? How often do we do it? And does this investment make sense? And that's little, right? That is on the spectrum of problems to deal with. That's not that big of a problem, but it was a real problem. And it was a real frustration to me as a fire chief. And there's anecdotes like that stick in my mind, that the data set, right? The schemas, the values that you have to choose from are designed to help fire chiefs to understand, like, what size hose line are we pulling more? How do we build training calendars, right? Most departments build training calendars on the back of what other people say they need to be training on, whether that's ISO, whether that's the accreditation folks, whether that's other people in between. Well, crazy idea. What if we built training calendars on the things we do frequently, some of the things we do infrequently, and we were able to get that information from incident reporting that said, hey, 97% of the time we're pulling 1 3/4 attack line, which tells us that we're probably getting pretty good at that, but we might want to play around with ground monitors and 2.5-inch stuff and some of these other things that maybe we don't do as often. Or maybe the training calendar is designed in our community to be different because these companies down here, they do that stuff a lot. And these people up here may be a little rusty, that we can target how we do professional development. There's no hope of doing that with the system today. And so some of it is in the data set. The other thing that really we're trying to make sure we do is just meeting fire chiefs and decision makers, and even further down the rank structure where they are, by just providing analytics back. It's not just about the information you get from an incident report. It's the fact that at our fingertips, we've got a lot of information on our communities. We're in Oklahoma City. And last night when I wanted to go to dinner, I'm not from Oklahoma City. I don't really know the restaurants here that well. But at my fingertips, I have access to crowdsourced information that tells me the best places to go and how far it is for me to walk there. And it's reliable enough that it's trustworthy that I use it, right, to make decisions as to where I consume food. And that's just a social example of what is the fact that we're walking around with a lot more information on our person than we've ever had. And I don't think it's a far stretch to say, what if we take some of this reliable data, whether that's social vulnerability, climate vulnerability, weather in general, the built environment information, stuff relating to the wildfire and WUI. What if we take that, marry it to incident data, add in some stuff that we don't have today, things like community risk reduction information, efforts that we make in a mitigative manner to make things less impactful when bad things do happen. And if we squeeze it all together and we make it consumable to fire chiefs in the form of analytics, well, heck, if you look at 27,000 fire departments, I don't know what your answer would be, but if you look at 27,000 fire departments and say how many of those departments can really glean some good information about risk in their communities because they have analysts and they've invested in other systems to do that, I bet it's 1 or 2%.
I think you're probably right.
It's pretty close. And now we can have a baseline, the baseline level of information about, all these categories of risk, response, performance. We can increase it on day one. And so it's a complex answer to what was kind of a simple question, but a lot of examples.
To kind of dig into maybe some even more specific examples you mentioned, again, just the ability to try and understand how many car crashes were there to then justify the need to buy extrication equipment. What would be some of these other ways that you talked about meeting firefighters and first responders where they're at? This is designed for the fire service to help decision makers. This whole data after the air break and even beforehand to, again, be able to have trend analysis, to be able to, again, make better decisions on staffing. What are some other, if you could point to 3 hypothetical, but hopefully no longer hypothetical examples of how the data that's being created and used in NERIS will help the fire service in the next 1 to 4 years?
Yeah, I think there's no shortage of examples. I think some of the best would be that we're collecting information. If you look at the schemas, which I don't know about your firefighter training, but I didn't use the word schema a lot until about a year ago. But now I use it now daily. I'm talking about schemas, trying my best to sound smart around all these very intelligent people I work with. But if you look at the schemas, that's actually the best evidence that this is just a much more modernized and comprehensive system. And one of the places that I think it just immediately resonates with me is what we do the most, is that when the bell hits at most fire stations, 60 to 80% of the time, right? What is it? It's a medical call. It's time-sensitive, life-threatening medical emergency, supposedly. And how are those classified? In the current system, what we do is we say 60, 80% of our run volume in this country is coded as basically one incident type, a 321, it's emergency medical incident. What is that? What do we really learn, right? By just everything's in one bucket. So what we've done is we've looked at the industry, we've looked at best practices, and now, medical incident types are split out. And we're even able in that community risk reduction schema and that module that's, part of the NERIS system, we're able to even integrate mobile integrated health, community paramedicine stuff. And so I think, one example is that just within our system, we're able to tell and understand a more comprehensive, spectrum of emergency medical incident. That the old system, you were classifying it as one thing. Now we have greater granularity and visibility to the good work that firefighters do. I think another example is what I mentioned to both of you, the after parking brake stuff, is that we are asking questions. FSRI has done fantastic work over the last, really 15 years, 10 years for sure, looking at ventilation, looking at search, looking at suppression. These are high-risk situations that firefighters put themselves in, right, in conditions that are immediately dangerous to life and health. And they've looked at what are the best ways to suppress fire, find victims, ventilate structures, so that we can not just affect a positive suppressive effort, but we can also pull people out that are viable. And so if you look at the data sets that we are asking questions about the rescue of occupants, if we're searching buildings, we're asking about the search of those buildings. If we're ventilating it, we're not just, showing an action as we ventilated a building. We're asking, how did you ventilate the building? And I think that list grows. And in a weird way, if you look at the industry, there's a lot of firefighters out there, like aggressive, salty, loving the job firefighters that I think they're going to get it. I think they're going to look at the data set and they'll be a little inspired to make sure that this is not just a chore, another fire station chore. This is valuable information. And so I think that those efforts, especially coupled with a research organization like, that's going to be a force multiplier. We're going to be able to look at data and understand things that we don't have any clue about right now. We theorize, we conceptualize, but the data now will speak empirically to the good work that firefighters are doing in these very high risk situations. I think maybe a third example is, we know that I don't know how often you have to refresh a data set and really dive into it to make it viable, to be able to look firefighters in the eye and say, like, this is working for you. But it's not from 1999 to the present, right? That's way too long of an interval. And so we know that a major release every year, minor releases as appropriate, like that's about the right cadence. But we also know that the fire service needs to be nimble. And we have this emerging hazard component, a module within NERIS that is just designed to be able to react more deliberately when we identify emerging hazards in the industry, whether that's corrugated stainless steel tubing, whether that's solar panel issues, which have been a hot topic, and of course lithium-ion batteries. But those are like emerging today. Well, they're not emerging in 5 years, right? They either go away, we solve them, or they become just another incident, another hazard, and there'll be another thing in the pipeline. And so I think it's just stuff like that. I could go on, but a lot of evidence that it'll be reactive for firefighters.
Pretty good 3 examples there. Let's talk about an emerging incident, though, or an emerging hazard. Okay. Wildland interface. I think a lot of people could say this is an emerging hazard, right? For whatever reason, climate changes, land use patterns, a lot of people moving into the interface. Like, we've got a problem that's been emerging, and there's so much that says that what goes on before response, like any hazard, what goes on before response is making a huge difference in fuel management and codes and whatnot. What is the future, perhaps the present, but I'd imagine it's probably something that's being designed now. What's the future of NERIS to start to really account for everything that's going on in that space?
Well, lucky for me, I have a buddy who's really involved in wildfires that I've always been able to tap when I have wildfire questions. So don't act too ignorant to anything. But no, we there's no doubt that NERIS was born with a primary focus on looking at wildfire and understanding the wildland urban interface. And FSRI are the folks that were in Lahaina and looking comprehensively at what happened there in an urbanized, wind-driven conflagration. And so we know that the current system doesn't tell, I don't even know that it tells a partial story of wildfire and WUI. And so what we have done within NERIS is first, we have an obligation to make sure that a firefighter can easily understand and document situations in which fires are within manicured lawns, right? That's not what we're talking about, but also distinctly describe incidents that are in the forest, that are wildfires, and then also denote those incidents where there's an encroachment from, this remote space into the built environment. And it's that interaction, that WUI interaction that we care about. And so it's making sure that we have values, and it's making sure we're asking questions that allow us to at least understand the problem, that risk, everybody talks about risk, but risk is the probability of something bad occurring multiplied by the severity. Well, we know when uncontained hostile fires interact from a wildland environment and they get around the built environment, we know that is among, if not the most dangerous thing that's going to happen in the category of fire in this country, if not the world. And so we want to make sure that we understand that quantity of incidents. And then within NERIS, we're able to flag incidents. We call them incident modifiers, but urban conflagrations and being able to denote the building to building spread of fire is something that you can do. So you now within this system, you can denote a fire is a wildland urban interface fire. And then you can note that, hey, this actually involved a transition of a fire that came from maybe a property use of forest and undeveloped land into an area that was more urban and became something that it didn't start as. And so that timeline, right, to understand that nature of an incident is something that we've done from day one, among other things.
I'll tell you what, man, I, for one, get excited hearing this, because certainly as a chief, I wish I had ways to better analyze this, whether it's all the medical calls we're doing, what are the trends, or whether it's what are we doing to reduce the risk in the interface, and how can it actually make a difference on calls. But I know as a boots on the ground medic, I was hoping that the stuff I was putting into the tablet, or I guess when you and I were back on the rig on carbon copy paper, spiral notebooks, I was hoping that was going somewhere from which something useful could be done with it. So it sounds like NERIS is really helping us all get there in a single voice, which is pretty cool. Absolutely. I mean, it's designed, and of course, we've all these records management system and CAD, CAD systems, they're partners in it, but it definitely is it's a union station of data from all these different conduits, all these different lines. And it's not even just response. I mean, that community risk reduction module that is part of NERIS is collecting information about, mitigative and prevention related activities that we're doing in the WUI, that if we're out there and we're doing, site inspections on areas that are prone to that interaction between the undeveloped and the built environment, that's something that we can document. Because as a fire chief, it doesn't matter if we're talking about residential smoke alarms or WUI or anything in between, to know where we're doing things to minimize or prevent bad things from happening. And if we look at where things are happening, and if we can note some gap there, right, it allows us to deploy resources, whether that's smoke alarm saturations, whether that's, doing some level of mitigative effort to prevent, reduce fuel or whatever. And so it's not just about response with this system. It is about looking about how can we get in front of some of this stuff, knowing that that's easier said than done, but it's part of it. Yeah, telling the story is a big part of it. Absolutely. Kevin, I got one last question. You got anything before?
No, for the sake of time.
We could go for hours. We could go for hours. So you come up through the ranks, you've been a chief of a department, you've been a president of this association, now you're a research program manager. You're doing a bunch. What makes you the most proud? It would be hard for me to pinpoint one thing, but I would say that by far the thing I'm most proud about is that I have 3 juvenile delinquents tax deductions at home. I've been on the road a lot. Like it's probably since 2014, 2015, the year I was president, I probably did 100, and I had a good count one time, and I forget the exact number. It was like 170 days on the road. And even today, I probably do really close to that. And on my low years, if you call them low years, I still bet I was doing 40 or 50 on the road, which is pretty substantial anyway. And so the thing that makes me most proud is that none of those kids have criminal records, right? That's a big plus when your father's on a iPhone screen just as frequently as he's in front of you. And so I have to pinpoint those boys. And of course, my wife back at home really does. She's a successful professional in her own right, but she manages to not only do that, but balance that job. And so I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say that that's exactly what I'm most proud of. Pretty awesome. Yeah. Well, I'm sure your wife and boys are proud of you. I'm proud to know you. We're proud holding you up. I appreciate awesome work. But Tom Jenkins, thanks for being here. Anytime. Good to see both of you.
Thanks, Tom.
We are certain you enjoyed hearing from those who are doing great things in the wildland-urban interface, and hope maybe you even learned a little something new. If you have a story to share, please reach out to us. In the meantime, we thank you for listening to Wildfire Chronicles heroism beyond the flames. We'll see you next time.